To talk about corporate integrity and how it improves the bottom line. That is an interesting topic. I did quite a bit of research on it because one of the applications of this framework, hey Jean, is how do we create an ethical company, ethical societies? How do we live an ethical life for ourselves personally? Hey Mike, nice to see you. And so, one of the applications for this in corporate integrity is saying, does corporate integrity really affect the bottom line or not? How does it? So, I did a bunch of research, and in fact, it's very clear that it does. So, there's a couple types of issues that come into play that will affect your bottom line regarding integrity in your company. One is how well are your employees trained in these type of corporate integrity aspects? And there was a thing that happened at Goodwill some time ago where Goodwill was losing a huge amount due to internal employee theft. I think it was around 50% or something. People were just stealing the stuff that was coming in. They probably thought, well, it's been donated, so what the heck, you know? And they weren't given, and this is a common problem, right? It's like, well, it's been donated, so who's it going to hurt if I take it? And so the organization of Goodwill was really struggling to maintain profitability because there was so much internal theft. And this is something I even experienced, right? This is a common sort of attitude where it's like, well, it's not going to hurt them. They buy so many of this, or so many staplers, or so many markers, or, it's not going to hurt them if I'm doing my own thing during this time I'm actually getting paid for to be working, right? So there's this attitude, oh, it's not going to hurt this big company, this big corporation. And obviously, that is incorrect because corporations that struggle with that, they have a huge issue with profitability due to theft, and whether that is theft of, actual items or theft of time, right? The time you're getting paid to work. So, what kind of a difference would that make, do you think, to have employees really trained in ethics, starting from the base foundation of what does it mean? You think that people know this, and that's, oh, everybody should know this. Oh, it's just obvious, right? You don't steal or whatever. But not everybody grows up in the same type of household and culture. And so when you think about that, some people may think, well, it's okay to steal if it's not going to hurt somebody. Or, if I take this, it's not really stealing, right? They have all sorts of justifications in your mind. I remember that when I was younger, I mean, I had no money, right? I grew up in a cult. We had no money. And, after I left and I was a student and I was barely just kind of struggling to get by, there was a sense where it's like, okay, well, you maybe buy this pirated DVD or whatever, right? Who cares? The big corporations are never going to know. It's just, it is what it is. It's not going to hurt anybody, right? Or downloading stuff illegally to watch it, like, oh, it's not going to hurt anybody, it's, I'm not taking something, it's just a copy of something, right? There's all this justifications that are very easy for us to make in our mind. And it wasn't really, and I was actually just kind of like, yeah, well, okay, not good, but whatever, it's not really hurting anyone. And then when I came up with this structure and I realized how core it is to the foundation of, if I'm saying, hey, I don't want somebody to rape me or murder me, or and that those rights and those ethical lines, they are very clearly defined going out in that stream. So I can't just say, well, this I don't want them to do, but this is okay, right? It's like when you really see the boundaries clearly, then you have to say, okay, I'm actually making a real choice here. This is not something that is a gray area, right? So that's what helped with that. And also becoming a creator and creating my own content, right? And then I was like, wow, I wouldn't want someone to steal my own content. So how do I make sure that I don't do that to somebody else, right? So NSC is saying people need to be explained in a new way they can understand, or they won't be able to break the generational lack of ethics and moral. Yes, you're 100% right. So that is exactly what I'm saying. Because where did people get their morals from or their ethical standards from before in the past? Right? Usually it was from church or from the Ten Commandments or from, they would sit every Sunday and they would have these kind of ethics classes, basically, right? Being told, don't do this, don't do that, don't sleep with your neighbor's wife, don't steal, don't lie, right? They would be in these classes, but those things to a lot of people are not as relevant anymore, right? There's a lot of people have moved away from that, or maybe they grew up in it, but now they're like, well, there was a lot of other issues that happened in that, and I saw like the people in my church or whatever violating those ethics and boundaries in so many ways. And so for a lot of people, they've moved away from that. And maybe a lot of people today haven't even grown up in households that had that type of, religious instruction or whatever. And the truth is, within the religions themselves, there was a lot of violation of these types of standards. So where do you go? If that was where people were going for sort of their moral ethical standard, and so much of that has been violated or eradicated, where do you go? Where do you go for that? And that's what this framework does. It gives a really clear, simple way to explain ethics that that allows you to still maintain and say, okay, this is the clear standard. I know this is what it is, and I know why, right? Because it starts, first of all, with my right of ownership in my body, and then my right of ownership of what I create, right? And violations of those rights. And it breaks it down very, very simply. So I guess it's kind of a new way to see it for a new generation, where we can have a standard that we can know is correct. We can know it's accurate, and it is consistent across the board, across all different types of religions and beliefs and stuff, right? Because in that sense, we're all going to agree and say, yeah, no, you shouldn't be raping and murdering. And, each of us has a property right in our body and in our creations. And there is an ethical way to create good deals, to create good exchanges and contracts, right? So that is universal, and this creates a simple standard that we can use for that. What is another way in which ethics is very important to the bottom line of a company? So it's not just sort of internal theft, right? Another way in which ethics is important is referrals. So this is very interesting. I read a study that said that if your customers perceive you to be ethical, then they will perceive the employees and the people in the company to be ethical. They are much, much more likely to refer business to you. And business referral is 100% the bottom line. So if they see people acting ethically within the company and espousing that standard, they're much more likely to refer business. So that's another key way that good integrity helps the bottom line of your business. NSC says the gut feeling most people get aren't able to process it, to understand it, to be ethical. The majority need to be shown firsthand. Yes, that is a great comment. So if you haven't, it's something called our norms, right? What is the norm around us? And I learned this growing up in China. So I experienced growing up in China, and China has a very different type of ethical or moral system, or to some extent, lack of it, right? Because in China, when the communists took over, they wiped out all religion. They also wiped out even their own sort of moralist or ethical teachers, right? They tried to wipe out the practice of Buddhism and Lao Tzu and the Tao and all of these kind of moral teachers that the Chinese had for generations, 1,000 years, right? And they replaced it with communism. And what communism said was the party is right. The party is ethical. And basically, whatever the party decides, whether it's killing you or taking your stuff or rewarding you or whatever it may be, that's what's right. Okay. And they wiped out the whole generation of lawyers, judges, moralists, intellectuals, people who would sit and ponder and consider these type of philosophical questions. Because they didn't want any of that. They just wanted it to be the party is God. Okay. So what happened in a situation like this where there was no moral standard? People's ideas about morality became very different, to where the government would really struggle, and to this day really struggles. And they have tried to say, okay, how do we bring back in? Because it's just a moral bankruptcy that existed within the country, where it's like, yeah, there's no problem with plagiarism. There's no problem with if I can cheat you, right? If I can cheat you in a business deal, then that's because I'm smarter than you are and I get away with it, then that's a good thing, right? Instead of that's a bad thing and I should feel guilty about it for cheating you, that's seen as a good thing. That's seen, I'm smarter than you, I got away with it. You weren't smart enough to catch me, you see? And so you have huge issues where, all of this, like people were putting cardboard into like baozas, which are these little dishes of food. People were mixing in poisonous substances into baby formula to expand the baby formula, right? To be able to sell more of it. And just like things that we consider really horrific, like poisoning babies, like you're mixing these poisonous substances into baby formula and you're selling that and you're like, that's okay, right? So there was a lot of this type of stuff going on. And within the country, in China, there was no way for people to trust each other because the legal system was broken and the moral and ethical system was broken, right? Because they didn't have an ethical standard anymore because they destroyed it in destroying all of the moralists and ethic teachers in order so that the Communist Party could say, we are the arbiters of morality. Now, has that happened to a large extent in many countries, right? Even in America, we see that to some extent going on, where it's like the government gets to say what is right and what is wrong, where, it's like the government in a way becomes God. And even if the government is taking actions that are immoral, that we would, if anybody else did them, we would say, no, that's immoral. It somehow means like this magical wand is waved where the government is allowed to do it, okay? Where we say, okay, well, if the government does it, it's okay, right? How can that be true? If the government commits an immoral act or an individual commits an immoral act, it's the same. The standard is the same, you see? So what happened in China that they have not recovered from, they cannot figure out a way to recover from it. The government is still trying to be like, hey, we need to bring back some sort of cultural identity. We need to do something to combat this because, the people have just shifted into an area of a moral abyss, right? They don't have a clear standard. And the government did that on purpose to gain control and power in a certain way. But now it's really backfired in the well-being of the country and the ability for it to operate and the ability for people to have deals, right? And as he is saying, it's inherently evil because nobody has a platform to debate with the almighty government. Yes, right? Nobody has a platform to debate, to speak up. But more than that, there is a way in which, and I wrote a paper on this when I was in school, right? It's the concept of the rule of law. Right? It's the concept that there is a standard that is above government and that the government also has to adhere to that standard, right? So this is why America is very unique in a way, because the Constitution is a contract that creates a standard. And it says the government has to adhere to the standard. If the government breaches this standard, the government is wrong. The political leaders are wrong, you see? China does not have that. Whatever the political leader at the time says is okay. That's how it works, right? So with that, there's a constant flux in a concept of right and wrong. So nobody has any anything concrete. There's nothing they can stand on and say, this must be true. That's a huge, huge issue. And we have this going on all over the world, actually. In America, too, there's a kind of a moral bankruptcy where we don't have a solid standard that we can say, hey, I know this is wrong because of this, and I can point to it. But look at the, NSC says, but look at the Chinese medicine versus the medical system in America. What is the difference there that you are referring to? Let me know. What is it? What is the difference you're thinking of when you say look at Chinese medicine versus the medical system in America? And if you're referring to the fact that there is kind of the TCM, right, traditional Chinese medicine, which is a very ancient system, which was long before communism and the communist government, right? It's thousands of years old, and it's in line with other ancient traditional medicine systems using natural herbal products like Ayurveda, right? Yeah, okay, so you're talking about natural medicine, right? So that came long before the communist government. In fact, the communist government does not really approve of it, right? Because this is people taking control of their own lives and power. So, yeah, so basically, but that's different, right? That's kind of a whole different topic, right? Which is saying, you know, how has our modern medical systems in China, in America, kind of poo-pooed or destroyed or pushed out all these ancient techniques because they cannot monetize them in the same way, right? So that's a different topic entirely, but that is something also, right? That's all of that came before what we're talking about right now, which is how communism kind of corrupted and basically deleted the moral system, right? And what do we experience in America right now, where we also don't have a moral standard? We have the Constitution. The Constitution gives us certain types of rights, but it didn't really clearly outline what is a moral standard. Probably because they figured, well, everybody should know this, right? You know, they no, please, I love your talking. Give me more information. You didn't come in halfway through the topic, actually. You came in right near the beginning. So, so this is why I created this, right? Because it gives us a really clear moral standard that, I mean, I could teach this to a little kid. I can teach this to an 8-year-old. I can explain it to them by talking about, you know, their body and their truck, right? And their sandbox, whatever it is, you know, why we don't hit people, why we don't bite people, because they have they have a property right in their own body. And this is why some other kids shouldn't come along and steal their truck and take their truck, right? So you can literally explain this to kids because the way I created it is so simple. And when I did it and I realized, oh my God, this actually encapsulates everything that we consider the moral law. And not just here, but all over the world. So including in China, right? Because even in China, even in all these other countries, murder, rape, theft, right? All of these violations of property rights are all considered wrong. They're all against the law. So, except when the government does it, except when someone in power does it. And that has always been the exception and is still the exception, even in America, even all throughout the world, where it's saying if the person in power is committing the action, then we're not going to say it's wrong. But that must be false, right? So for many, many years, right, we had a situation where women were property of men. So they would say, well, if a man kills his wife or rapes his wife, that's okay because she's his property, you see? So the person in power always had a way to justify their immoral acts simply by their status, simply because they were the one in charge or in rule or in power. Now we know that that is not true because now we have created laws that protect people against that. NSC says, I think the gray area has been kept intact so that lawyers, politicians can manipulate the system. Yes, you are exactly right. That is what happens, right? They don't want people to understand this so clearly because then they would be able to identify the laws that violate it. They would be able to identify the way the system works. They would be able to identify when the politicians are violating it, when the government is violating it. When it's this simple and this clear, you begin to spot the violations all over the place, even within the system that you live in. So that you're 100% right, NSC. That is exactly what it is. Because these principles are the principles on which we built the law, right? But there was always a caveat. There was always a way out. There was always a way that if we kept it a bit fuzzy, if we made the law seem just so complex and so confusing that people would just throw their hands up and give up and say, oh, well, I don't know. I can't deal with it. I can't, how can I know what's legal and what's not, right? Even lawyers get frustrated with it. Because the person in power can make a decision that can even go against the law. Do you know judges can make decisions that go against the law, that go against precedent? They can make a decision, and whether or not that decision ever gets reviewed, very rarely. I mean, when I was a first year, I remember I was working on a case as a summer associate, and I had to create a whole brief, and it was about a situation with this young woman who was pregnant, had been injured in the delivery. And so I created a whole brief, and I found all the cases that supported it, like why she should, be given, recompense and stuff like that. I turned it into the attorney. He gave it to the judge. I don't even know if the judge looked at it, but he ruled against it. He ruled against precedent, which judges are not really supposed to do. They're supposed to follow the precedent. But in this case, it was like a little court in Bakersfield, and judge just didn't care. He was going to rule how he wanted to rule. And was the woman going to have the ability or the money to appeal it? No, she was like a poor woman, with a new baby who'd been injured and now had to pay for medical expenses. So a lot of times they don't get overturned. This is the issue with the people in power choosing instead of following the fundamental principles. NSC says, yes, everyone should adopt these, what I call universal truths. And these people in power shouldn't be the ones dictating the moral standard. Yes, this is true. Once we know, right, and this is what the rule of law is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a moral standard that the people in power also must obey. Okay, but we all know how that goes, right? We see them violating it all the time, which is why it's so important that each person is given this simple diagram, this simple thing to say, okay, these things are wrong because these are all violations of our property right in our body, in our mind, in our creations. This is how a deal should be done. If it's not done this way, this is a violation of that deal. If we breach a contract, if we engage in fraud, right? If we lie in the creation of a deal or an exchange, that's fraud. So understanding those principles and applying them universally is what we need. All right. She says, exactly. For instance, taxes, right? So taxes is an interesting example of this, right? And that is something definitely to go into more, which is there a way that makes taxation where it is moral, and is there a way where taxation is immoral, right? And this is true of all of the ways in which we engage in business. Even the criminal justice system, right? There's ways in which there is just, and it's been getting worse and worse, where we think that people are given certain rights, right, in America, to a fair trial and all of this sort of stuff, but that is not happening. That is not happening. There has been one law after another passed that has completely eaten away at people's ability to get a fair trial, even in America, right? Let me give you an example of one of these laws. And this has happened to people that I know, friends of mine, okay? There's a law that says that the government can freeze or seize your assets if you've been accused of a certain type of a crime, right? Now, this law was originally written only to deal with like major criminal organizations, right? Like Al Capone or people like that, okay? Big criminal organizations, um, uh, where there was racketeering and there was just, a huge thing, and they couldn't get that person on something, so they would freeze their assets so the person, couldn't run or whatever. Guess what? This law is now being used against all kinds of just simple little business people, just regular people, right? So I know someone who, and he's spoken about this publicly many years ago, 10, 15 years ago, right? He had a business, he had a supplement business selling health supplements online. The government didn't like his advertising. They said, the way you're advertising violates the FTC regulations, which is your advertising. Like you can't say certain things about your product and this and that. Not really that, terrible a crime, okay? He wasn't like, shipping in cocaine or something, okay? And it wasn't even, they hadn't even proved it, right? They just accused him of it. They just accused him of it. He had not gone to prison, he had not gone to jail, he had not gone to court, he had not gone through any kind of review process. They just accused him of it, and then they froze his assets. They froze his bank accounts, right? They froze all his money. And guess what they said to him? They said, either you walk away, you just accept it, you say, okay, I plead guilty, I walk away from all my money, and we're going to let you off, or we're going to freeze your assets so you don't have the money to hire an attorney. And if we get you, right, which we will, right, we're going to get you on this, then not only are you going to lose all your assets, you're going to have a felony, you're going to go to jail, you're going to end up, and you're going to be deeper in debt because you had to pay all those attorney's fees from money you didn't have. How fair is that? How fair is that to seize someone's assets, to seize the money they would need to pay an attorney? And do you know what they do with that money? This is going to drive you crazy. You know what they do with that money? The money that they freeze like that and then basically coerce someone who is, they've never been to court in their life. They don't know anything about the process. It's very scary to them. And so he decided, he was just like, well, I have no idea about this. I'm just going to walk away. He didn't want to fight, right? He walked away, lost everything, walked away, and had to completely restart. Guess what happens to that money? It ends up getting split between the state and local government. How is this not theft, right? They take his $1 million and they split it between the state government and local government. That's what they do with the money. So they coerced him into walking away from his money because he didn't have the education to know how to fight it. He didn't have the money to hire a lawyer because they froze all his bank accounts. That is coercion. That is a violation. And in my mind, that is an example of government theft, right? It's one thing to say, hey, we think you're doing this. We're going to file a case against you, right? But you don't take somebody's assets until after they have been proven guilty, not before. NSC says, I've had that happen to me exactly. I was representing myself and objected evidence that clearly exempted me from being criminal. The judge basically said, okay, and still found me guilty. There's nothing I could do about it unless I had the money for an expensive lawyer to overturn the judgment. And he had to cease and desist. Exactly, and they'll bankrupt you through the court system. Right, so that exact same thing happened to another friend of mine, where there was an attorney general who went after him for a crime, which he didn't commit, and he had evidence that he didn't commit the crime. He had evidence. He brought in the person who wrote the law to testify on his behalf to show that what he had done was in fact not a crime, it was exempted from the system. They refused to listen to this. But this was like a top person. This wasn't like just a little old anybody, okay? This was a top person who was writing the laws. The judge refused to accept his testimony, found the guy guilty, sent him to prison, took 2 years of appeals for them to find, okay, actually, sorry, he wasn't guilty, right? 2 years of appeals because the system is rigged. They can just say, sorry, you can't, we're not going to accept this evidence, even if it's completely valid evidence that allows you, that should allow you, it should show you're not guilty, right? And this has happened over time. This stuff has worn away at our legal system in America. Nobody seems to be aware of it unless you get caught in the legal system. And they've just passed like law after law after law, allowing them to wear away at the protections that you had in the legal system, to where now they can basically convict anybody they want. It's crazy. It's crazy. NSC says, and the sick thing is this happens every day in our court system. Yes, it does. It does. And so, like, she says, this is why I can't watch Judge Judy. I can't stand how rude these judges get with their power trip ego. Yeah, I actually don't watch any legal shows. I don't watch any legal shows. I don't watch, and this is also why I don't participate in litigation, because I know that this is true, right? This is why I'm a corporate attorney. I deal with contracts. I deal with principles. I won't participate. I'm not a litigator because I just can't stand watching this violation of justice happen all the time. So be aware of that. And this is why you do your best to avoid the court system if you can. It's like all of these little things get passed, all these little cases and regulations, and they do it so subtly, you don't really notice what's going on. And the general populace has no idea what's going on. But now, when you have something that's like a 98% conviction rate, right? When district attorneys have a 98% conviction rate, that has to be false. That has to be false. There is no way all those people are guilty that get pulled in. There just isn't. Okay. But you can still have people who really are guilty, and these are the ones that make the news, right? But they hire very expensive attorneys. They have the money to work the system. They can play in it as long as possible, right? But small people who don't have that money, the system grabs them, and it's just like, you're done for, right? Guilty or not, it doesn't matter. That is, and to me, that is a massive violation of justice, is what we have going on right here in America. Okay, this is happening right here in America all the time. Now we hear about people being detained and held, right, without trial, without a hearing, and it's just shocking. It's shocking, and who's aware of it? Who's fighting for this? I don't know, but this is what I'm talking about. When we as people, as individuals, do not understand the fundamental moral and ethical principles, and we allow our government to take the role of being the arbitrator of morality and saying, this is moral and this isn't, and if I do this immoral thing, it's moral, right? This is what happened in China. This is what happened in China. This is what has been going on here in America for a long time. It is just eating away at this, okay? Which is why we don't have this, probably why this is not being taught in schools, a fundamental, simple to understand ethical standard. Anyway, that was a whole thing that I wasn't planning on getting into, but thank you, NSC, for your contributing and for speaking up and for talking. It makes this a lot more fun. So I really appreciate you getting on here. I go live here at 10 a.m. every day, except sometimes on the weekends. I go a little later. I got to sleep in sometimes. So anyway, I hope you guys all have an amazing day. Share this, hit like, share this with people that you think need to hear about this, or you think would be interested in this topic. And let's make sure that we are teaching these fundamental, it's like 8 principles. It's very, very simple, right? You have your 3 primary rights. You have the 5 principles of any good contract. And that's all you need to know. That's all you need to know, really, to understand sort of the universal moral ethics. That's all you need to know. So let's get this out. Let's share this, because you are right that there is a moral bankruptcy going on where we don't know what is right or wrong, or where to look, or what an ethical standard is, that has been washed away. NSC says, do you mind if I send you a message? No, please send me a message. Send me a message. Send me questions. I love to hear from you. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Okay. And send me questions because I like to answer questions. So if you have questions of topics or things you'd like me to talk about, feel free to send me questions. Okay. You guys have an amazing, amazing